Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into tonight's second half, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under this video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and guys, it definitely matters. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half, shall we? Alright everyone, so in today's original upload, I talked about an experience or an encounter about a family in Florida that had a kind of pond with some gators in it. Well, I went off the top of my head with that at the end of today's video, but I wanted to share with you the actual encounter, so I found it for y'all. Here it is with a couple others. Enjoy. Today's first encounter. It was around 6-ish, maybe 7 years ago. I was maybe 8 at the time. My brother had just been born and we shared a room together. No, we only had one window that looked out over a swampy lake with thick woods near it. My mom and me would often go visit the lake because there was around 3, maybe more alligators there. Yes, I know it was dangerous, but the alligators didn't seem to mind us much. We often fed them lunch meat, and they didn't seem to mind it. They kept their distance, but never did I get the impression that they didn't want to be near us. There was an alligator in particular that got close to us than the rest, and when I say close, I don't mean within arm's reach. I mean, I think it was a she would come out of the water and grab the meat, stare at us for a second, and go back. And I was perfectly fond of this one. I don't know. Just seemed nicer. Never could put my finger on it. Anyway, we also lived next to very thick woods. And by thick, I mean if you walked in a zigzag pattern for 10 minutes, there was a very real possibility that you would have to climb the nearest wasp-ridden tree to find your way back to my house. Which was the only one for quite some distance, but never mind all that. The thing I wanted to talk to you about is why there are 2 alligators in the pond instead of 3. A week before one of the alligators went missing, me and my mom noticed a trash smell. And not the kind of trash smell where you say, ew, and move on with your day. I mean the kind of trash where you take one sniff and automatically cover your nose and gag. And soon after this, no game at all. Sure still birds, but no deer, which here frequent in the area. No snakes, no lizards, nothing. And the smell was often accompanied with whoops. And I mean deep, airy whoops, not chippy squeaks of birds. But my mom and I didn't think about how birds couldn't have made the sound we heard. So we ignored it. And when we couldn't, we just passed off as woods being the woods. But one night I was awoken, my baby brother whimpering. Me being the caring brother, I got up to console him. I picked him up and looked out the window and hushed my brother as soon as he stopped crying. I could hear the faint but very clear hissing of an alligator and dragging sounds. I'm a Floridian, so I can recognize alligator noise from the woods being the woods. There was nothing in the woods that could make an alligator hiss like that. Maybe other alligators were fighting with each other, and to that I say this was the kind of hissing where it was on the defense, not the offense. The kind of hiss when there is a bigger gator somewhere near, but all the gators were the same size, around 5 to 9 feet. But then the hissing stopped, followed by a distinct crunching, snapping sound. Then the sound of dragging and chewing. But the most distinct this is that I swore I could see an almost human shape 8 to 9 feet. I want to say it was bigger, but me being 8 at the time and the fact that people exaggerate prohibits me to do that. But it seemed to be dragging something over its shoulders, something long and slender out of the pond. Me and my 8-year-old child, clearly terrified, put my brother in bed and stayed up for the rest of the night, eyes trained on the window. The next morning, when my parents went into my room to wake us up, they clearly saw sleepy and scared 8-year-old me holding his brother, staring out of the window. When they asked me what was wrong, I simply said, someone was outside. This made my dad go outside, gun-trained, as looters were a big concern for his odd reason, and he took me with him. We investigated the pond. Nothing too out of the ordinary, except the gators were out of the pond, but we did find something a few yards away from the pond. And I say yards even though I'm American, because I want to emphasize this was more than a few feet. We found fresh gator corpse, and by fresh I mean that not even flies or buzzards had gone to pick at it yet. And one thing that still stumps me to this day is that we found a part of the gator's jaw. Not like the whole jaw, but a distinct fragment part of the lower jaw. Never did see that gator I was fond of again. Well, that was my encounter. If you want to share it, I don't care. I just wanted to tell this to someone, as my dad passed it off as a bear, even though bears don't frequent where we lived. So that's it. Today's second encounter. Back in 2017, I was camping in Zoar Township, Ohio, about 3 hours from Cleveland. We were in a cabin which had a bathroom with a window. At about 3 in the morning, I was in the bathroom and was looking out the window, which was open just a crack. I remember how quiet it was. Spring nights, Ohio, are typically somewhat alive with birds, crickets, whatever. This night, it was dead. I just watched for a while. About a quarter of a mile from our cabin was the edge of the forest. As I watched, something about the size and shape of a large man, I'd roughly estimate 6.5 to 7 feet, quickly darted out between two trees. It stopped, and at that point I thought it was a bear, which Ohio has. I saw it raise, grab a branch, shake it, then dart back into the woods. I only saw it for maybe 6 to 7 seconds total. I didn't have a chance to get many details, since I was so far away, and it was dark. The branch it shook, I checked the next day, and it was about 6 feet up. I didn't see any prints. Today's third encounter. I've seen this creature very close to Jasper, Arkansas. I've lived in Arkansas Ozarks for over 20 years. I never knew what it was until recently, doing some research. And I do believe I know what they are. I first had a visual sight of one off Highway 65 on Highway 256, heading towards Welcome Home. When I saw it, I couldn't believe my eyes. I had never seen anything like it. What shocked me the most, and what was the most memorable, was the horns coming out of its forehead. Very much cat-like, but it was its face with the horns that really shocked me. As I drove in shock from a car crash, not believing what I saw, until I started doing research on the subject. For over 10 years in a remote region close to Mountain View, Arkansas, you can hear a howl every single night. Usually after midnight. I never knew it was until I did the research, and it's very elk-like, almost like a horn, but definitely a howl. If anyone is brave enough, I can show you exactly where to go to hear this, and where I made visual contact. Today's fourth encounter. Over the past few years, here in Kansas City, Missouri, I've noticed some weird activity going on. Down the road, about a mile towards Kansas City International Airport, there is a public walking trail that is almost completely surrounded by thick woods and brush. About a year or so ago, it was open to the public 24/7 with no limitations. My wife and I never walked the trail due to work schedules and having a newborn to take care of. But driving by it on a normal basis, I noticed it was closed, all of a sudden, with roadblocks sealing off the gravel driveway along with a metal gate. It was like this for about a year until recently it opened back up with a big sign out saying park hours, sunrise to sunset. Could there have been an encounter or attack in those woods? I know the Dogman is here in Kansas City area. My brother and I have found strange tracks over in Liberty. I've lived in the woods all my life, building tree houses, bonfire pits. But the woods we found the tracks in, I've never been able to go into without having an eerie feeling of being watched. We've also found chunks of deer carcass, a dead eaglet torn to shreds in a tree, and a weird smell once you go far enough back. Not to mention, my wife had an experience with a dogman when she was younger that she refuses to talk about. I don't know where it is in Kansas City, I just know it's around here. Today's fifth encounter. Quite a few years ago, I was camping out in the woods and had a very strange experience. I'm honestly asking if anyone's heard of this kind of thing with a Sasquatch or anything like that. It was a car camping thing far from the city in an abandoned campsite. Nobody was around for miles, and it was windy as hell that night. We had supper, pinched the tent, and settled in for the night. I woke up a couple of times in the tent and swore I could hear heavy footsteps. But with the wind, I thought it was just my vivid imagination. But I didn't sleep very well that night. In the morning, my girlfriend and I got up and prepared a coffee. And she looked back and turned white. I was like, what? I turned back and looked back at the tent. Right over the back end of the tent was a tall tree, and in that tree, about 9 to 10 feet up directly above the tree, was a freshly severed leg of a deer dripping blood onto the tent. It had been impaled onto a broken branch. It was fresh, bleeding kill. And the part of the kind that haunts me is how far up the tree it was. I'm 6 feet tall, and there was no way I could have gotten that limb up there without climbing that tree. But there was no way to climb the tree, as it was too skinny. I'm still wondering to this day how it could have got there. It wasn't there when we got to the campsite. It had to have been taking something with a huge reach to do it. The limb was also severed, not cut, like it was ripped off a body of the deer. Has anyone ever heard of something like this? I've tried to explain this event with any logical or rational process, but needless to say, we packed the car in record time and pissed off out of there as fast as possible and never went back. Today's sixth terrifying encounter. My daughter and I decided to take our horses out riding like we occasionally did in Lakeland area by Blackwood. It was August 9th, 1976. I remember the date because we knew Hurricane Belle was soon to hit the New Jersey coast, so we wanted to get some riding in before that. It was a windy day, but we followed the usual trails going along the dirt paths that were close to the junkyard. We approached one section of the woods when suddenly there was dead silence. We usually heard all sorts of wildlife in the area, but heard nothing now. Then a crow cawed loudly 3 times and the horses started acting up. We couldn't figure what was going on. And then up in the front of us, about 100 feet or so, we saw this thing. It was about 6 feet tall. Its back, which it was scratching against a tree, was facing us. At first, it looked like a large dog on top of a horse. I asked my daughter, "What is that?" It started walking alone the path where we were riding on, and we slowly followed it up the hill. But the horses were reluctant to stay calm. They started going wild. The thing turned around, and I could better see what it looked like. It had whitish hair with black spots on its hips. It had horns coming out of its head and red, slanted eyes. Its nose had a pig-like snout. It stood on 2 feet that ended with cloven hooves. Its hands were tipped with large claws, and it looked like it was slobbering all over. It jumped onto the path with its arms wide open, lowering its head like it was going to charge us. At the time, I felt as though I was in some kind of trance, like I was in a movie or something. Only when my daughter yelled, "Let's turn around and get out of here," is when I realized we may be in danger. We were certainly afraid of whatever it was. Then it did charge us, tucked its arms in and running like the Bionic Man. It tried to grab one of the horse's tails, but we took off. When I looked back, I noticed it had stopped in the spot we had taken off from. Like in the movies, after we got away from this thing, we saw a Washington Township police car by the junkyard and told the policeman driving that there was some strange creature in the woods that came after us, and we described it to him. The policeman said, "Well, I hope the hell we don't catch it," and started to fill out a report. But amazingly, this thing showed up in the junkyard, and we all saw it as it hopped over the 8-foot fence, galloped in front of the police car, and ran into the woods. After that, we took the horses right back to the stable. The policeman wanted my address so he could speak to me later, but I didn't make it home in time. He had already come and gone. I never found out if he filed the report. Maybe he didn't want to report it. Later on, the owner of the local ranch told me one time he found one of his horses dead in the field with its stomach ripped open. I'm telling you, I believe there is something out there. There were 3 witnesses that day. My daughter and I can recall vividly every moment of our encounter with this thing, even after 40 years. I'll never forget it. I've never told this story to anyone outside of my family, but my daughter convinced me that we should share it. Today's final encounter. I live in this really small town in eastern Oregon, and I don't think there is or ever has been a sighting of the Dogman in my neck of the woods. Tons of Bigfoot sightings, but not that beast. The reason why I title this crazy is because I was high when I saw the thing. And a lot of people think you see stuff high. And that's a yes and no. With me, it's a medicinal, and it helps me with glaucoma, headaches, and depression. I put that there because maybe I did make it up in my head. But holy shit, I'm still scared hours after it occurred. Last night, I finished writing a couple of papers for my college courses, and as I finished up, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck start to stand up. I turned to my window where the blinds are down but not folded, like I could see somewhat through them. I could have sworn something moved to the left side of my house where the corner of my room was. I figured it was an owl or something, so I didn't freak myself out. I closed the blinds, and I head to the kitchen to grab something to drink. In my house, the only light you can get at night is by the outdoor lighthouse that acts like a floodlight to an extent, and the other source would be the Christmas lights and moonlight. I didn't want to turn anything on, so I didn't want to wake up any of my folks, so I had everything off. While I was grabbing a drink of water at the sink faucet, I looked outside, and there was this thing standing behind our Christmas tree. I know it was a thing, and not a person, because It was almost as tall as the tree. That's a good 6 to 7 feet tall, or about a meter, I think. I froze. I could see these two greenish-yellow eyes that reminded me of my dog whenever you'd shine the light on them. That frickin' thing made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream and shout and get this creature away from my house. The eyes blinked a couple of times, but just stared me down. I couldn't make a good look of its face, but I tried to turn on the kitchen light, and I couldn't even make out what I was seeing until I walked to the sliding screen door that connects to the living room. That thing must have been staring at me or something, because I walked over there to see if the light reflected something, and I got way more than I bargained for. I saw the lanky legs, the very skinny body, and the last thing I could make out was the snout. I haven't heard of any Bigfoot around here with a long snout. I tried to get some pictures, but it was too dark to really pick anything up. Even with the light coming from the kitchen to reflect on it, my phone could make out a vague shape, but you could confuse the easily with a tree. I tried to use the flash, but no good. I think that's how I scared it off or something. After a minute, maybe less, of staring me down in the living room, it turned around and hunkered down on all fours and ran toward the open field. I didn't dare to step outside, but in the bathroom, where we have this tiny window cracked open, I could hear a bunch of cows and a few horses going nuts. I'm used to hearing coyote noises whenever the local horses neigh or cows in an uproar, but not this time. They were freaked out what seemed over nothing. I haven't heard cows or horses be that upset when it's this close to winter. I want to debunk this as a prank from one of my friends, but the only friend I have over here lives a few streets down from me. And what? He'd have to wait by a tree until 2 a.m. to see if I got up to use the bathroom and get a drink? There was a video on the internet of a Dogman looking through a screen window, and those eyes matched that of this creature. That thing was so frickin' creepy, and I don't want that thing prowling around whenever I'm up late. So yeah, that's my encounter. Again, this is in Eastern Oregon, and I have never heard of a Dogman in this part of the state. Hopefully it was a one-time thing. If not, I'm staying strapped or getting clapped. Alright everyone, that was tonight's second half. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. With that, I want to thank you all for all of your support. It really does mean the world to me. This channel would be nothing without you guys. And just stay safe, everyone. Also, may the Great Spirit watch out for us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.